Forget opinion polls. Artificial intelligence is being used this federal election to learn our secrets behind who we intend to vote for. Friendly.
It's a great place.
Good weather.
You're listening to ABC Radio Brisbane.
Brisbane!
ABC Radio Brisbane. Coffee.
Much warmer than Melbourne.
Well, we know opinion polls can be a hit and miss affair. We only need to think back to the federal election of 2019 to know that. But data crunchers are going much further than opinion polls these days to get a more accurate picture on our voting intentions. Data strategist Elisa Choy is from Maven Data, and they use artificial intelligence and software to crunch huge amounts of online information about you and me to try to predict which boxes we'll be ticking at the pre-poll booths from today or on election day in 2 weeks' time. Elisa, hello.
Hi.
The polls out today say that the popular support for Labor has risen to 39%, with the coalition falling a point to 35%. Does that fit with what you're seeing?
No, I don't look at polls. I look at polls and I think it's like measuring the sky with a ruler. It doesn't work in predicting the future.
So what do you look at and how does your method differ from traditional polling?
Fundamentally, with polling, you're asking people for an opinion. And aside from the fact that you're taking a very small sample, say 1,000 people, asking them a question about their opinion and how they think they will vote, when it comes to opinion polling, sometimes people don't often tell you the truth. And that's why you get the polling data completely off in key elections. And we know that with topics such as elections, they're very emotive. And we've seen it in the US in 2016 and 2020. President Trump came through against what all the polls were saying. So in this election, we don't look at polling at all. We're actually looking at what are the key issues that are driving people to vote. And we measure sentiment through measuring emotion in the content that people engage with online.
And so how do you intelligence to get to the heart of what people are thinking, but what are you looking at?
That's a really good question. Essentially, when we do market research, we're using the largest market data set on earth, which is the internet. So all topics are researched. It all starts on the internet and we engage with the world online. So when we're analysing elections, for example, we are focusing on the key issues, the key parties, and eventually the key seats. And we're analysing what people are reading, how they are engaging with that content online, whether it's websites, blogs, or social media.
So you are saying that you're looking at issues that not necessarily election issues. They could be people commenting on any number of topics, but you are sort of saying that that goes to their makeup as a voter.
Well, when we analyse sentiment, because the internet is such a large data set, we're talking about petabytes of data that we're analysing. And a petabyte is 10 to the power of 15. So one with 15 zeros, bytes of data. And it's only with the technology of artificial intelligence that we can process this in real time and understand within the language used online how people feel on certain topics. Now, we don't go fishing or boiling the ocean. We actually strategically pick the issues that matter, and that's based on historical issues around elections and also specific issues around key times of the year. And for 2019 was different to 2022. There was some, there's some issues now that we didn't look at in 2019 that we're focusing on now. So when we're analysing sentiment, it's a basket of issues. And that gives us a clue as to how people are generally feeling, which gives us an indication of how they're going to vote.
And so what issues in particular are popping up and gaining traction this election?
Well, we did a first cut at the start of the election campaign, and we listed the top 10 issues that are predicted to influence voters. Now, things have moved on since then, but the key themes that were coming out 3 weeks ago were in relation to survival. So the number one issue, Rachel, was cost of living, and then it was unemployment and property values and homelessness. And the fifth issue was climate change in relation to Mr. Morrison.
So that wouldn't surprise the major parties, though, that what you're finding is cost of living. Can you repeat some of those? Cost of living, inflation, interest rates. I mean, they are the topics that we are hearing our politicians talk about.
Well, remember, 3 weeks ago, we didn't have the interest rate rise. So at the start of the campaign, it was purely around the general cost of living issues. The second one was unemployment. The third one was property values. And the fourth one was homelessness. All of those speak to economic issues, and those speak to the need for voters to understand policy around survival. Now, in the last week, we've seen that the interest rates have increased for the first time in a very long time. And so obviously interest rates now have come up front and centre, and it's now within the top 5 predicted issues 2 weeks out from the election.
That is really interesting. But so let's drill down. How do you think votes will fall?
This is so complex, Rachel. This is probably the most complex election that I've looked at. It's actually harder to call than the US. And the reason being is because in Australia, we have the two major parties. And what I'm seeing towards general consensus sentiment towards these two is that people generally don't like both of them. So there's no clear winner. So having a look at each of the major parties, the key thing that we're seeing here is that whilst the polling data is saying that the coalition is behind, as a brand, the Liberal National Party brand is the strongest party brand nationally. So that means that they've got strong, intense sentiment, which is both positive and negative, and high expectation.
Isn't that to be expected of an incumbent, though?
It is. However, you'd also expect that Labor would have the same emotional profile, which is not what I'm seeing.
And what about the minor parties? We're sort of hearing that that's going to be the story of the 2022 election, is the Teal independents and perhaps some of the minor parties. In Queensland, we don't have any Teal independents running, and so perhaps parties like Clive Palmer's United Australia Party and the Greens, you know, that will be the tale that we're telling here on the day after the election. What does your evidence show you?
At this stage, I'm seeing, quite surprisingly, that the United Australian Party is a relevant brand and a real contender to upset this election. And it's interesting to note that we also looked at the One Nation Party, and they don't have power nationally. So whilst they have very strong positive sentiments towards One Nation, it's in pockets and most likely in Queensland. But you're seeing that what I'm seeing here is that with the United Australian brand, their key messages around freedom and anti-vaccine and anti-government and anti-lockdown, it's actually resonating really successfully. And in particular, the issue around vaccine mandates is still a relevant and top voting issue.
And is this because people are searching for that topic on the internet, or because the advertising is placed in front of their eyes?
Well, it's no surprise that Clive Palmer has put a lot of money behind advertising in this campaign. However, it's not about having the most attention, which is advertising. Surely Labor and Liberal all have a lot of attention by the help of the media. It's unfortunate to see that we don't have much cut through for the Greens or the independents on the mass media scale. So it doesn't necessarily mean that those with the largest megaphones will cut through. It's really about what they're saying. Because if you're talking about stuff that's relevant to you, you'll listen. It doesn't matter if somebody's shouting at the top of the building and very loudly. If it's not relevant to you, you don't listen. So that's what we're picking up on. Issues that not necessarily are based on what everyone is talking about with the loudest megaphone, like Clive Palmer. But it's clear that whatever he is doing, the messages around freedom and anti-lockdowns is working.
Are a lot of Australians still undecided with 2 weeks to go?
I'm looking at the data now, and it clearly is that I call it a bobblehead moment. We are still very much undecided because the two major parties are not favourable. And then we're turning to other options. So it's unfortunate to see that the Greens have not made cut through. Whilst they have very strong positive sentiment, there's not enough cut through federally. And so in my assessment of the Greens in this election, they are lost in the woods. They're not going to be appealing to swing voters. So you've got a situation where you've got people don't necessarily like both parties. Greens are not in the picture. There is some messaging coming through the United Australia that's resonating, but people are now turning to the independents, which is a very interesting story I'm starting to see.
Yeah, and Elisa, so you work for you own your company Maven Data, but who are your clients? Who's using this information?
My clients include industry, corporations, brands, academia, and government.
Okay, and so are you paid by any of the political parties to gather this evidence?
In this election, no. This is the first time we're deeply looking at an Australian election. I'm not sponsored or paid for or working with any of the major parties or minor parties or
Okay.
any.
But your clients are obviously interested in, what you'll read and what you're looking at and how they can plan for the future.
100%. Everybody's looking for an edge. So when we're looking at predicting macro trends, these are things that set the tone for strategy, product, marketing, and messaging. So with elections, it's exactly the same. We're looking at the same data set. We're understanding people, culture, and society. We're understanding the emotional drivers that will determine how people will behave, whether it's buying a product or voting for you. It's the same equation.
Elisa Choy, it's been fascinating to talk to you, and your final word on what we're headed for on the 21st of May. It sounds like what you've been saying is that it's going to be a tight contest.
At this stage, it's going to be very tight, and what I expect to see is in the next 2 weeks, sentiment's going to intensify. We've got one final debate on Wednesday, and we've also got the rise of the independents. So next week, I'm going to be taking a closer look, seat by seat, and making a call on key independents to make an assessment of where the numbers will fall.
It's been great to talk to you. Elisa Choy from Maven Data, thanks very much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
That's Elisa Choy from Maven Data there. And as you heard, she's been looking at the tea leaves of the internet, so to speak, and what clues we all drop with our searches and our reading and our scrolling and our internet activity in general. And she's been looking at what that data might mean for the way that we all plan to vote on ABC Radio Brisbane.